After a lifestyle of drugs, alcohol, and even a little bit of Satanism, Matt Spicknall had his life shifted, and now he's impacting the next generation.
Hi, my name is Matt Spicknall from Dream City Church. My story for Hope Heroes is going to be kind of a transformational testimony from me growing up in Catholicism to then venturing into Satanism and some drugs, and then finally getting saved once I got to high school. In Catholicism, I learned foundational principles of Christ, but that was kind of all ruined when I saw one of my second priests not exemplify that within his daily life. So then I moved over to Satanism, which one of my friends at school introduced me to. I then dabbled in that for a few years, and then once I finally got saved in around 2017, my life took a drastic turn. Nowadays, I'm able to use my testimony, able to use everything God was able to save me from and that I walked through to help students in our youth program, help my friends around me, and really just truthfully lift other people up.
Well, I am so honored today to introduce Matt Spicknall. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Aubrey.
Well, Matt, you are an amazing leader in our youth group, and I know so many of our kids have fallen in love with you and really appreciate your ministry in their life. So I'm excited to hear your story today and where it all came from. Now, Matt, tell us about your childhood and your first origins in the church.
Yeah, so my first origins in the church were Catholicism. I was, as soon as you're born, you're baptized, and then you're straight into the program. It was all good. I was a Bible-believing individual up until like the age of 11. I had a shift in my home church. We ended up moving from one priest to another, and sadly my second priest didn't reflect any of the ideals of Christ. I was sent from Sunday school to his house, which was on campus, to deliver some paperwork. And when I entered the home, there was pornographic images on a 80-inch TV, Lexus in the front yard, cigars, alcohol, marijuana, like everything you can think of that a holistic leader wouldn't have, because they always preach modesty. So when I saw that at the young age of like 11, I really just kind of decided that, this can't be true, this can't be right, because obviously this is the head of our church. He represents God. So I sort of backed away from church in general at that point.
Did you tell your parents about that?
I did, and, growing up in a staunch Catholic household, it wasn't really, received necessarily.
Yeah.
My parents at that time weren't saved in general. They knew, church. They didn't know Christ, though, and that's something a lot of Catholics deal with and what I dealt with a lot as well. So I ended up going through the program and being respectful to my parents, but as soon as I got to the age of 14, 15, 16 in high school, I'm like, hey, I'm out, goodbye.
Yeah. And from there, what started to happen when you left the program?
I left the program, actually the last year of my youth program there, we ended up going to this thing called Grasa Day, which was much like a hype youth night, and that's the first time I smoked weed, was at a youth night.
Wow.
It was just kind of there, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. Through that, I ended up leaving church, smoking cigarettes, drinking, partying with friends at school, all things that youth this age still deal with very much, but their parents won't know, and kids are crafty. They're good at hiding things. My parents didn't know until I finally told them before I moved here.
Yeah.
But,
And so how did it progress from there? Because you went from being in a Catholicism, very traditional household to then starting to dabble in drugs and alcohol. Where did it progress from there?
From there, it progressed to, I was hanging around friends that were very artistic and theatrical, and one of them had ended up going to a bookstore called Barnes & Noble, and they picked up LaVey and Satanism by Anton LaVey, which was a theology at the time, but more so a philosophy. And when I read it, there was the 11 Elvinisms, which are much so like the 10 Commandments, and it preaches love, inclusion, all of this, but once you get to around the 10th one, it says, if someone comes into your dwelling place and does not respect your household, destroy them.
Whoa.
So it means mind, body, soul, and spirit, erase them from existence. There's lesser and greater magics with blood sacrifices in there as well. It's something that can start so innocent as just, oh, well, this didn't work out for me, maybe the other side's true, but then you start dabbling into something that's really just opening yourself up to the darker aspect of spirituality in the world.
So coming from Catholicism, though, why was that attractive to you?
It was attractive to me because it was very much preached with inclusion. It was preached with a a sense of belonging and peace and like, oh, hey, by the way, it's not that way. We're about our own people, about ourselves, building up ourselves. And Catholicism was very rule stricken, and it still is to this day. It's very thou shalt not, thou shalt do. And whereas Satanism, it really has the freedom to kind of be what you want it to be, and it's very moldable. So I think that's why it was so attractive.
And it became attractive until
Yes.
you learned really the negative implications
Yeah.
that it could have. How did you see your life react when you started to adopt these principles?
Quite honestly, it's weird. There was a weird sense of peace, but it wasn't true peace that we know from God. It was very just, oh, I can do whatever I want,
Yeah.
I can smoke weed, I can party, I can do this. And
Yeah.
it was very nondescript. There was no purpose within life in general other than just making yourself happy day by day.
Yeah.
Once I finally got to church, however, and I finally was introduced back into church, I then sort of realized, like, oh, crap, this is all, like, wrong,
Yeah. And that true peace really came through Christ.
Yes.
And not Satanism. So
Yeah,
what would you
absolutely.
say to parents out there? Because the Satanism's so crafty,
Yeah.
as you've said. They try to draw you in. They try to say that there's peace in it, but
Yeah.
really it's misery.
It
and
is.
what are some warning signs for parents and things you would say to parents whose children may be looking into these things?
Yeah. One of the true tell signs you can see from a kid is their music, what they're listening to,
Wow.
the different artwork that they're engaging with. There's a band in which I used to frequently listen to called Black Dahlia Murder, which is actually a death metal band with satanic influence. I liked it because of the guitar riffs and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Once
But
again, so crafty.
it is, yeah. But when you look at your students, when you look at your kids, you really need to see, okay, number one, do they have a place of belonging within their church? And if they don't, what can we do for them? If it's a different church, if it's a different youth group, if it's taking them to a different program, get them in it. Just get them in a place where they can build community. That's
Yeah.
what I lacked in Catholicism. Because I didn't have that community, it was so easy to leave.
Yes.
Even if the kids don't want to go to youth group for Christ, but they want to go for community, a fun aspect, and to get somewhere to hang out with people,
That's
get
enough to get them there.
get them in a
Yeah.
Christ-like environment. Number two is you have to watch what these teachers are teaching people in school.
Wow.
Schools these days, and school when I was graduating in 2018, it's completely devoid of Christian principles.
is.
We're covering things from how to have safe sex, not how to have godly sex.
Right.
We're covering things from how to date in relationships versus how to date with purpose of marriage. We're
Yeah.
not teaching Christian principles. When you factor in that your students, your kids are in a school environment, in a public environment with non-Christian principles for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week,
Yeah.
where are they at more than home?
Yeah.
They're in there more than they're in church. So
Yes.
the principles that they're going to be ingrained into their DNA are non-Christian principles if you don't build that foundation within them.
Wow, I mean, that is some great advice for parents, for sure, to what to look out for. Now, Matt, how did you get back into Christianity? How did you find God again?
It's kind of an interesting story. I ended up serving in a theatrical group called International Thespians, and I was a sound designer and technician. So a lot of my friends that were in theater were Christian. They knew I wasn't. I had a bunch of crystals around my soundboard, and I was like, I want nothing to do with this.
Wow.
Yeah, literally, I had like a crystal collection. I believe these rocks could save me from turmoil. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. So one of my friends, Scarlett, ended up inviting me to her church, Living Hope Church, which Pastor Todd came from.
Incredible church.
And I ended up helping their youth pastor set up their microphone system. I told him day one, hey, I'll help you in tech. I'll do whatever you guys need. I don't want to be preached at, though, because I tried it and it didn't work for
Wow.
me. Through that, they found out I played bass, and they threw me on the worship team. So I started serving on worship and sound before I ever accepted Christ. But it was such a loving community that truly exemplified the principles that I thought Satanism had to give. And I was like, this feels different, though. They had a true sense of peace about them. There was a direction that the church was going. And that's what happens once you get into a house of God that's led by the Spirit. If you
Right.
have a church that's devoid of Spirit, you don't have a church.
Wow.
So that's what I was actually ingrained from, was a church devoid of Spirit.
Yeah.
We didn't believe in the Holy Spirit. We were cessationists, and we didn't have that aspect to our daily lives.
Wow.
As soon as I accepted Christ, it was a growing season for sure, and one I had to work through. I had close friends along the way that helped me work through that, but
Wow.
you needed to make that shift along the way. Once
Wow.
that happened, it was rather nice.
And so this has been many years now that you've been
Yes.
back into the church and you've been serving, and your life has just been so blessed since we've been
Yeah.
watching just the blessing on your life. Now you are serving in our youth group.
Yeah.
And there have been some students that have come through our doors that have gone through similar situations like you. And you've
Yeah.
been able to walk them through these situations. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I've had some students in which it's been tough. I have a rule that I set with all of my students, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You have my number, you need to call me if you need something. So when we look at those aspects, I very much don't treat these students like students, because they're not. They're dealing with adult issues.
Yeah.
Pastor Ash has been an amazing help in that process. I update him all the time of anything we deal with. But if the students call, I drop everything,
Yeah.
because that's what they need. That's
Yeah.
what Christ did for us on the cross, and that's what I feel called to do.
Thank you, Matt, so much for sacrificing sleep, time. I mean, God has used your past in such a special way to lead these kids, and we're so grateful for you.
Oh, thank you, Aubrey.
Thanks for coming on today.
Anytime.
Well, if you have a youth age student, that's someone who's in middle school or high school who needs a community that's going to lift them up and not tear them down, you need to send them to Dream City Youth or a youth group near you. There are so many great leaders who have been through so much in life and have so much experience and can talk to them and lead them and guide them towards Christ and His love. Go to dreamcitychurch.us to find a campus near you.